Hello and welcome. Today I'm going to talk about electroconvulsive therapy as it was used in the Third Reich, at Auschwitz, and as a means of murder. I've already uploaded a video on a character called Emil Gelny. He was an Austrian doctor who was involved in the pseudo-euthanasia murder program, and in 1943 he actually was head of two institutions in Austria. Here I want to discuss how electroconvulsive therapy came about in Nazi Germany, to give a sort of an idea of how his machine may have been accepted by those involved in murder. Electroconvulsive therapy was initially developed in Italy in the mid-1930s, and found a German medical review from the autumn of 1939 where it was actually described. So this was used as medical treatment for psychiatric illness. In Nazi Germany, however, it entered a system that was already shaped by racial ideology, forced sterilisation, starvation and mass murder. Although electroshock was presented as a modern therapy, its introduction was slow, uneven, and it was often resisted by psychiatrists who believed that schizophrenia was purely hereditary, and indeed it was untreatable. Production of machines was limited by war shortages, and most psychiatric hospitals either never received the device or used it only rarely, probably because they didn't know how it worked. At the same time, the same state bodies that controlled psychiatric care also were organising the murder of patients under the so-called euthanasia program. I prefer to use the word pseudo-euthanasia because I have respect for euthanasia, where it's done as a willing operation by the person who realizes that they're in so much pain that they have to end their life. But so that it wasn't. Euthanasia, as done by the Nazis, was murder because it was decided by others without the consent of the victim or indeed the family of the victim. Now, it's strange to think though that electroshock therapy actually reached Auschwitz, and it's in a very specific and somewhat unusual manner. In 1944, an electroshock apparatus was constructed inside the Auschwitz III Monowitz labour camp, operated alongside the IG Farben plant. So it's often called the Bühnewerke, making artificial rubber. The plant, incidentally, is still in existence today. The device, the ECT device, was built inside the detainee hospital of the camp. Its creation took place with the unofficial approval of two SS camp physicians, that's Edward Wirt and Horst Fischer. I've done videos on both of them and you can find them. If I remember, I'll put it in the description. The driving force behind the project was a Polish prisoner doctor, Zenon Drohitsky, who had established a neuropsychiatric department within the Monowitz hospital. Now, before the war, Drohitsky had trained and carried out research in Bern, in Brussels, and Paris. He'd also gained direct experience with electroconvulsive therapy at Grenoble. When he attempted to flee occupied France to Switzerland, he was arrested by the Germans. At the time of his arrest, he was carrying plans for an electroshock apparatus in his rucksack. He was deported to Auschwitz, and there he later attempted to put this knowledge into practice. Drohitsky later described the existence of such a device at Auschwitz as a senseless luxury in view of the gas chambers and all the other murders that were taking place there. Despite this, the project was actively supported by the SS physicians Wirt and Fischer. For them, the electroshock apparatus became a prestige project. At the end of 1943, when Enno Lolling, the chief physician responsible for concentration camps, visited Auschwitz, Fischer demonstrated the use of electroshock therapy on a prisoner. The purpose of the demonstration was explicit. Fischer wanted to show that electroshock therapy could make emotionally disturbed prisoners fit for work again. Lolling was directly subordinate to the SS Economic and Administrative Main Office, which oversaw the exploitation of prisoner labour. Its constant priority was to maximise productivity for the German war economy. From this perspective, electroshock therapy was not seen as a care, but as a means of restoring labour power. Following this demonstration, interest in electroshock therapy increased at SS level. In the spring of 1944, the method was again discussed amongst SS physicians working at Auschwitz. Drohitsky was ordered to write a scientific lecture on electroshocks, with particular reference to the work carried out in Monowitz. This lecture was then presented by Fischer. The stated aim remained the same: treating mentally ill patients, or who were prisoners, in order for them to return to forced labour or slave labour. At the same time, Drohitsky himself was experimenting with electroshock as a substitute for anaesthesia during surgery, because anaesthetic drugs just weren't around, or if they were, then they were in very short supply. This medical motivation stood in sharp contrast to the SS perspective, which viewed prisoners primarily as expendable labour resources in the service of the Nazi war. During the post-war trial of Horst Fischer in 1966, now he was arrested. He hid wasn't even hiding. He was living quite openly in East Germany. Had it not been for a traffic accident, and then perhaps at the start he wouldn't even have got a hold of him. Although there were demands from West Germany, information had been sent from West Germany regarding Fischer. So at his trial, former prisoner doctors who had worked with Drohitsky stated that the electroshock apparatus could, in their view, have saved many lives had they not themselves been prisoners. Their testimony stressed the gap between medical intent and the conditions under which the therapy was used. After the war, it became clear that electroshock devices were also considered for direct killing. In Austria, which was obviously occupied by Nazi Germany in 1938, psychiatrist Emil Gelny used a converted electroshock device to murder psychiatric patients in Guging and Mauer-Erling. Now, Gelny wasn't really a psychiatrist. He was a general practitioner who had been put in charge of two psychiatric clinics where people were murdered, and he's often given in literature the name of psychiatrist, but he, as far as I can tell, he wasn't, because he was given his papers as such. He didn't pass the exam, put it that way. Now, Gelny was responsible for the murder of let's say at least 300 patients in this way. We don't know the whole number. It might have been as many as 400, might even been slightly more than that. Gelny later contacted the euthanasia leadership, including Paul Nietzsche, with proposals to use electricity as a means of killing people at a time when the regime was searching for new solutions for what it called its E-problem, E being euthanasia. In the summer of 1944, there was a meeting of doctors involved in euthanasia which took place in Vienna. Sorry, I should say pseudo-euthanasia. At this meeting, Gelny demonstrated the method by killing a patient with the device. Senior figures, including Karl Brandt and Nietzsche, showed interest in inspecting the technique. Although Gelny's case remains the only fully documented instance of murder using electroshock apparatus, discussions about such use occurred elsewhere, including at Eichberg, where staff recalled debates about whether electroshock machines could be used to kill the patients that they wanted to murder. Now, the Auschwitz electroshock project therefore stands at a critical point. It was introduced next to the murder apparatus, not as part of humane care, but as a tool to maintain slave labour. At the same time, the same technology was being considered elsewhere as a possible instrument of murder. Electroshock therapy at Auschwitz was neither purely medical nor openly murderous. It existed in a space where healing, coercion and exploitation overlapped, shaped entirely by the priorities of the SS and the Nazi war economy. This episode shows how a medical technology developed for treatment could be repurposed under National Socialism. In Auschwitz, electroshock therapy was tolerated only insofar as it served the extraction of slave labour. Elsewhere, it was being explored as a initially discreet method of murder. So in both cases, the boundary between therapy and killing had effectively disappeared. So thanks so much for listening to this, and if you might be interested in the longer video I did on Emil Gelny, I'll also give a link to that alongside the other links, if I remember to do it. So I upload every day now at 2000 hours, and on Tuesdays and Fridays I do longer videos, which might be a documentary, or might be me talking to the camera like this, it might be a live premiere, or it might be a live chat, it might be all sorts of other things. So that's what I do. I also have a paid membership, which costs £5, €6 or $6, and that'll give you access currently to over 800 videos. But for the moment, from me, thanks for listening. Bye for now.